I recently followed the knocking sounds of a pileated woodpecker and found this pair building a nest in the forest. The really amazing thing is they were excavating this cavity right underneath a shelf mushroom. I just love this display of intelligence, to think that a woodpecker would consider the overhanging mushroom for a little protection from heavy rains. I just think that's so cool, and today I wanted to share some footage showing how pileated woodpeckers build their nests, including stages of construction, roles of the male and female, and some calls they use to stay in touch. So one of the things to know about pileated woodpecker nests is that being such a large bird, they do need quite large trees in order to actually make their nests. So if you want to find a pileated woodpecker nest, you want to think about where in your landscape are the biggest trees, especially if your landscape has been cut in recent years. These woodpeckers have quite large territories, as much as 200 acres, but there may only be a few key spots that have trees large enough to support their cavities. So this nest was being constructed in an area that has some of the largest trees in the whole forest. It was this little space where a few big hemlocks met the edge of the deciduous forest. And it was really awesome to just spend this afternoon watching their excavation process and to see that there are actually distinct stages to how pileated woodpeckers make their nests. Obviously, they start on the outermost layers of bark, but once they get into the cavity, the first phase involves digging and scraping away the inner wood. And they'll do this for extended periods of time, around half an hour or so, as the chips build up inside the cavity. Then in the second phase, they spend a bunch of time just pulling the chips out, and it was fun to watch this woodpecker repeatedly picking out the chips and throwing them over his shoulder. He did this for quite a while and would go back and forth between these two phases of construction. I always say there's a lot of subtle things you can learn from birds by looking at these repetitive behaviors where there's a particular pace and rhythm to their action. So as I was watching, there was this moment amidst the almost constant excavation work when the woodpecker suddenly got completely silent and went into a very distinct alertness pattern for about 20 minutes. And it really makes me wonder about, what is this woodpecker listening to? What is he aware of that makes him stop and just listen for a while? And if I listen carefully enough, can I learn to hear for myself what that woodpecker knows about the forest? Another thing to know about pileated woodpecker nest construction is that males and females actually have very different roles. The way you can tell the difference between males and females is a bit tricky, but if you look carefully, the red crest on the top of the male's head comes all the way down to the beak, and males have a little red mustache on the side of their face. Females don't have these extra bits of red. So knowing this, it's possible to see that the male is the one who's doing most of the excavation, and the female most of the time was just feeding nearby, and she would occasionally pop in to see how things were going. There was really just one period of time when the female seemed to be more involved in the nest construction. Things were pretty far along, and she went inside the cavity and started poking her head out and looking around. And she wasn't pushing any dust out, she wasn't excavating anything. It was almost like she was just testing it out and doing an inspection to make sure everything was good. And throughout the whole afternoon, this part of the forest was regularly filled with the knocking sounds of excavation, which sound very much like feeding when pileateds dig into trees looking for insects. Then every half hour or so, I would also hear a series of wicking calls being made by the female whenever she would move to a different feeding area, like a contact call to help them stay in touch. She would also make this call when coming in towards the cavity. So if I wanted to find a pileated woodpecker nest in the future, this call is definitely something I would listen for because it can be heard from very long distances. And the key thing to notice for nest behavior specifically is that, in contrast to the potentially 200-acre feeding range where you might also hear this call, on this day, every call happened within a 1-acre area that includes the nest. So listen for consistency of location with pileated woodpecker calls as indicators of nest activity. I hope you enjoyed this little journey into how pileated woodpeckers make their nests. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.